Under Fire. A story of love, duty, and impossible choices. Part 1. The ambush the first time I met Captain David Torres. He was carrying me out of a burning Humvee. I didn't know it was him. I was unconscious, bleeding from a shrapnel wound in my left shoulder, my camera equipment destroyed, my satellite phone shattered. All I knew later was that someone had pulled me out of that vehicle before it fully ignited, and that someone had kept me alive long enough for the evacuation helicopter. My name is James Chen. I'm 32, an independent war correspondent, and I've covered conflicts in Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan, and now Ukraine. I've seen what war does to people. I've documented it. I've told the stories that politicians and generals don't want told. But I'd never been part of the story before. I woke up in a field hospital in Lviv. My left shoulder wrapped in bandages, my right arm in a sling. And a soldier sitting in a chair beside my cot. "You're awake," he said. He was tall, maybe 6'3", with dark hair, tan skin, sharp features, and eyes that had seen things I'd spent 12 years trying to document. He was in full combat gear, though someone had at least removed the helmet. "Where am I?" I asked, my voice rough. "Field Hospital, Lviv. You've been unconscious for 36 hours. He leaned forward. "The Humvee you were in took a direct hit. 3 soldiers died. You would have been the 4th. You pulled me out." "Yeah." "Why are you here?" "Because you're my responsibility now," he said simply. "You were embedded with my unit." "You got hurt on my watch?" "I'm Captain David Torres. I'm staying until you're stable enough to leave." "You don't have to do that, I know." He settled back into the chair. "But I'm doing it anyway." Part 2. The hospital David stayed for 5 days. He'd come in after his shift, sometimes at 2 a.m., sometimes at 6 p.m., depending on what was happening at the front. He'd sit in that chair, and we'd talk. Not about the war, not at first. About everything else. "What made you a war correspondent?" He asked one night while the hospital was quiet except for the distant sound of artillery. "I wanted to tell the stories that don't get told," I said. "I wanted to document what war actually does instead of letting politicians sanitize it." "And has it?" he asked. "Changed anything?" I was honest. "No, mostly I document atrocities and then watch the world scroll past and forget." He nodded like he understood, which he probably did. "I became a soldier," he said, "because my father was a soldier, because my grandfather was a soldier, because I thought it would mean something defending democracy, protecting people." He paused. "Now, I'm not sure what it means. I'm just trying to keep my people alive, your unit, my unit. My friends, my responsibility." By day 4, he was bringing me food from outside the hospital, but better than hospital food. He was telling me about his family, his mother in Los Angeles, who worried constantly, his sister who was a doctor, his father who died when David was 16 by day 5. I realized I was falling in love with him. It was stupid. We'd known each other for 5 days, 3 of which I'd been unconscious. He was a soldier in an active war zone. I was a correspondent passing through. We lived in different worlds that would never intersect again, but there was something about the way he looked at me. Like I was the most important thing in the room. Like my survival mattered more than anything else in the world. "You need to leave," he said on day 5 when the doctors cleared me for medical evacuation. "They're flying wounded out this afternoon. You should be on that flight. I should get back to documenting. You should go home and heal," he said, and there was an intensity in his voice I hadn't heard before. "Please, James, please get out of here. What about you?" I asked. He didn't answer. Part 3. The email. I got home to New York and tried to convince myself it was over. 3 weeks of physical therapy. 3 weeks of my editor asking what the hell happened and why I'd come back wounded and incomplete on the story. 3 weeks of trying to live a normal life in a city where nobody understood what I'd just experienced. And then an email, forwarded through my publication's general inbox because David didn't have my personal email, didn't have my phone number, didn't have any way to contact me except through my work. "Jamiz, hope you're healing. I think about that Humvee more than I should. I think about you more than I should. There's something I need to tell you. I can't do it in person because of where I am and who I am and what the military would do if they found out. So I'm writing it here, knowing it might not reach you, knowing it probably shouldn't. I'm gay. I've been closeted my entire military career because it would destroy everything my career, my unit's trust, my family's reputation. But meeting you, seeing you willing to risk your life to tell truth, watching you fight for something you believe in despite the cost it, made me realize I can't keep living a lie. I don't know if you feel the same way. I don't know if what I felt in that hospital was real or just trauma bonding. But I needed you to know. David, I read it 17 times. I called my editor. I told her I was going back to Ukraine. You're not healed, she said. I don't care. James, you were shot. I need to go back. She understood. She didn't like it, but she understood. *** Part 4. The return finding David took 2 weeks. His unit had moved positions. The front lines had shifted. Nobody would tell me where he was. Soldiers protect their own. I was a journalist, an outsider, a risk. But I was also persistent. I called the military attach. I explained that I'd been embedded with this unit, that I needed to verify information for a story, that Captain Torres had critical information I needed. They gave me coordinates. I flew into a forward operating base in eastern Ukraine just as dawn was breaking. The smell hit me first: diesel fuel, gun smoke, the specific human smell of people who haven't showered in days. The sound: second, distant explosions, helicopter rotors, soldiers shouting. And then I saw David. He was briefing his team in the command tent, pointing at a map, explaining an operation scheduled for that afternoon. He was thinner than I remembered. He had a scar on his neck I didn't remember. He looked like a man who'd been to hell and come back changed. When he looked up and saw me, his entire face transformed. "You came back," he said, breaking away from the briefing without explanation or apology. "Your email? That was a mistake. I shouldn't have sent it. It was stupid and dangerous, and it wasn't a mistake," I said. And I did feel the same way. I do. I'm feeling it right now. He looked around. Soldiers everywhere, radio operators, officers, people who could destroy his career if they knew what he was about to do. He didn't care. He pulled me into the supply tent, and he kissed me like we both might die tomorrow, which, given where we were, was a very real possibility. "This is insane," he said when we broke apart. "This is impossible. I'm a captain in the U.S. military. You're a journalist. If anyone finds out, I know, my career ends. My family finds out, I become a cautionary tale. I know. But I love you," he said, and his voice broke. "I've been in this war for 6 months, and I'm numb to everything except the thought of you. And that's dangerous because numbness keeps you alive, and love is a distraction, and distractions get people killed." "So we stop?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. "Then no, we don't stop. Because if I'm going to die tomorrow, and statistically, in this job, I very well might, I want to die knowing I loved someone. I want to die knowing I was brave enough to choose that." "David, 3 weeks, he said. "You stay for 3 weeks, you document the unit, you file your story, and you fall in love with me in every moment we can steal. And then we figure it out. Or we don't. But at least we'll have tried." Part 5. The 3 weeks we learned each other in the margins of war between his shifts. In the darkness of the command tent, after everyone else slept. In the 5 minutes of dawn before the base woke up. In the brief moments when we could pretend we were somewhere else, someone else. David told me about his childhood, his father teaching him to shoot, to defend, to never show weakness. His mother's constant terror that he'd die like his father. His sister's refusal to speak to him after he joined the military. I became a soldier because I was trying to be a man. He told me one night, his head on my chest, my fingers in his hair, and I learned too late that being a man meant being able to choose who I love, not denying it. I told him about my parents, immigrants, who wanted me to be safe, to take a normal job, to not risk my life documenting other people's wars. They were right, I said. I should have listened. "No," David said. "You shouldn't have. Because if you'd listened, you wouldn't be here. and I wouldn't have met you, and I'd still be numb. I documented everything, not David. Never David. I would never compromise him like that, but the unit, the operations, the human cost of war. I was telling the story I came to tell, but I was also living a different story. One where a soldier and a journalist found love in the last place love should exist. Where impossible circumstances created something real. Where two people chose each other, despite knowing it would cost them. Part 6. The decision on day 19. David's unit was sent on a 3-day operation in enemy-held territory. I watched him gear up. I watched him check his weapon, his ammunition, his communication device. I watched him do all the things soldiers do before they go into danger. Come back, I said. Because I couldn't say anything else? I will, he said. Because soldiers always say that, even when they don't know if it's true. He kissed me in the command tent, where anyone could walk in. He didn't care anymore. Didn't care who saw, who knew, who might report him. I love you, he said. I wanted you to know that before. Don't, I said. Say it when you come back, okay, he said. I'll come back and I'll say it again. You didn't come back on day 1. He didn't come back on day 2. On day 3, at 18:47 hours, a soldier came to find me. Captain Torres asked me to give you this, the soldier said. Handing me a handwritten letter, I opened it with shaking hands. If you're reading this, it means the operation went wrong. It means I didn't make it back. I want you to know 3 things. First, that meeting you was the realest thing that ever happened to me. Second, that I'm sorry for leaving you. Third, that you should tell my story. Not just my story, our story. Tell people that there are gay soldiers in every military in the world. And we're just as good at dying for our country as straight soldiers. Tell people that we deserve the right to live openly, to love openly, to not have to choose between our identity and our service. Tell people about me. Tell people that David Torres was gay, and he was a good soldier, and he loved James Chen with everything he had. David, I read the letter 17 times. Then a radio crackled. All personnel, this is command. Captain Torres' unit is returning to base. 8 of 15 minutes. 1 wounded, 1 Mia, remainder accounted for. I ran to the landing zone. The helicopter descended in a cloud of dust. Soldiers poured out. Medics rushed forward with stretchers. And then, limping with his left leg clearly injured, came David. He looked up and saw me, and his face transformed. I ran toward him, and he caught me in his right arm. His left was being supported by one of his soldiers, and he held me like I was the only real thing in the world. I told you I'd come back, he said. You were hurt. Not bad. Shrapnel. Nothing fatal. He looked at me with everything he had. I meant what I said in that letter. All of it. I love you, James, and I'm done hiding. Desk, Part 7. Aftermath. The story I filed when I got back to New York was the most important I'd ever written. Not just about the military operation. About David. About a captain in the U.S. Army who'd served his country with distinction. Who'd saved my life. Who'd risked his career to be honest about who he was. It went viral. Not in a bad way. In a we're finally having this conversation way, the military establishment tried to suppress it. The Pentagon issued statements. But it was too late. The story was out. And David was out. He faced a court-martial investigation. The military tried to argue he'd compromised unit security by allowing a journalist to document his feelings. But his soldiers testified. Every single one of them. They said David was the best captain they'd ever served under. His sexuality had never compromised his ability to lead. By the time the investigation concluded, policy had shifted. The military couldn't dishonorably discharge someone for being gay anymore. They could try, but they'd lose. The public wouldn't allow it. David was discharged honorably. He was given a medal for bravery. And he came home. Epilogue. 6 months later, David and I were married. Not in secret. Not in shame. In a ceremony in Los Angeles with both our families, his mother crying with joy, my parents finally understanding why their son had risked everything to tell stories that mattered. David started a nonprofit helping military personnel come out safely. I continued reporting, but with more focus on LGBTQ plus issues in war zones and conflict areas. 1 year after we met in that field hospital, we were sitting on our apartment balcony in Los Angeles, looking out at the city, and David said, "I was right." About what? About you mattering. About your stories changing things. About love being brave. We got lucky, I said. So many people don't. I know. He took my hand. That's why we're going to spend the rest of our lives telling their stories.